In the annals of history, some leaders are celebrated as heroes, others condemned as villains. But what about the ones who were both? Imagine a ruler so formidable, so utterly ruthless, that his own allies trembled at the mention of his name more than his sworn enemies did. This is the story of a 15th century sovereign whose shadow loomed large over a fractured kingdom, a man whose methods forged a nation but haunted its soul. He was a paradox of power, a king whose iron will bend kingdoms to his whim, and whose legacy is a twisted tapestry of salvation and terror. Was he a monster cloaked in the robes of a king, or a savior forced to make monstrous choices? Let's journey back to an age of chaos and steel, to uncover the truth behind the monarch who was feared by all and trusted by none. His story begins not on a throne, but in the crucible of a brutal childhood. Born into a world of constant conflict, the young prince learned early that survival was a currency paid in blood and cunning. His father, the king, was often away at war, leaving the boy in a court that was a viper's nest of political intrigue. He witnessed betrayal firsthand, saw loyalty bought and sold, and learned that a soft heart was a fatal weakness. His tutors were not scholars of poetry, but hardened generals and cynical spymasters. They taught him strategy, not just on the battlefield, but in the whispered corridors of power. He was sent to live as a political hostage in the court of a rival empire, a gilded cage where he was both guest and prisoner. This experience didn't break him. It forged him into something harder than steel. He observed their strengths, memorized their weaknesses, and vowed that he would never be a pawn in someone else's game. When he finally returned to his homeland, he was no longer a boy. He was a predator, ready to claim his birthright. His ascent to the throne was swift and merciless. He didn't just defeat the nobles who rebelled against him, he annihilated them. He made examples of those who dared to defy his authority, ensuring that the memory of their demise would serve as a permanent warning. He was building his kingdom, one conquest, one execution, at a time. His reputation spread like a plague, carried on the winds of rumor and the chilling accounts of survivors. It wasn't just his victories on the battlefield that inspired fear, it was the silence that followed. After a battle, his armies wouldn't celebrate. They would methodically carry out his orders, leaving behind a scene of such desolate, ordered quiet that it was more terrifying than any war cry. He didn't just want to win, he wanted to eradicate the very will to fight. His method of justice was equally extreme. In a time of rampant crime and corruption, he offered a simple, brutal solution: order at any cost. Thieves and bandits who had once terrorized the countryside vanished. Not through reform, but through public, gruesome displays of punishment that left entire town squares empty and silent, the populace too frightened to even whisper their dissent. He famously hosted a grand feast for the beggars and vagrants of his capital, only to lock the doors of the great hall and set it ablaze, declaring he was cleansing the city of its parasites. He believed that to build a strong nation, you had to first cauterize its wounds, no matter how painful the process. His name became a tool of control, a word parents used to frighten unruly children into obedience. He was the monster in the dark, but he was also the reason the roads were safe to travel for the first time in a generation. This iron-fisted rule, however, came at a great cost to his foreign relations. While his neighbors respected his strength, they were deeply suspicious of his motives. Forging an alliance with him was like making a pact with a wolf. You might be safe for a time, but you could never turn your back. Negotiations were always tense, conducted under the weight of his unyielding gaze. He saw diplomacy not as a partnership, but as another form of warfare. He would demand concessions that bordered on surrender, knowing full well that the other kings were too afraid of his military might to refuse. Trade caravans from allied nations were often halted at his borders, subjected to crippling taxes or outright seizure under the thinnest of pretexts. He was demonstrating that even in times of peace, he held all the power. In one infamous incident, he invited a neighboring monarch for a state visit to discuss a mutual defense treaty. The king was received with lavish honors, feasts, and entertainment. But when he tried to leave, he found the castle gates barred. He had become a guest in a luxurious prison, held captive until he agreed to become a vassal, his kingdom effectively absorbed into the growing empire of his host. His allies learned a harsh lesson. His friendship was just as dangerous as his enmity. They were trapped, unable to stand with him, yet too terrified to stand against him. Centuries have passed, and the shadow of this formidable ruler still lingers. His legacy is a fierce battleground of historical debate. Walk through the capital he forged, and you will see grand statues erected in his honor. The people of his nation today often see him as a founding father, the strong man who united a fractured land, drove out foreign invaders, and established an era of law and order that allowed their culture to flourish. To them, his brutality was a necessary evil, the harsh medicine required to cure a dying kingdom. He was their savior. But venture into the art galleries and museums, and you will find a different story. In the dark, brooding paintings from that era, he is depicted not as a king, but as a demon, a monstrous figure feasting on the suffering of the innocent. To his enemies and to many scholars, he was a tyrant, a paranoid despot whose thirst for absolute power knew no bounds. They argue that the peace he brought was the peace of the graveyard. The order he created was the order of the prison. So what was he? A visionary patriot who did what had to be done, or a bloodthirsty tyrant who crushed humanity under the heel of his ambition? Perhaps the truth is that he was both. A figure born of a violent age, who used that violence to carve his name into history, leaving us to forever question the true price of order and the dark, tangled nature of power. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into history's shadows compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories that challenge what we think we know about the past. See you next time.